Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining our live event titled Womanhood, an in-depth analysis of femininity in Islam. This is going to be a weekly event every Monday throughout the month of Shaaban. We also have a weekly event every Thursday throughout Shaaban with Sheikh Jafar Hamoud, and that's titled Reconnecting with Allah. So it'll be amazing and lovely for you to join our events throughout this month. So hopefully we can learn more together and grow and develop as a community. I'm super excited for today's event with Sister Sahar. I mean, this is a topic that's very close to my heart and that I'm very passionate about. And I know a lot of people in our community are very interested in this topic, especially now with the interest given in feminism on different media platforms. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to Sister Sahar Jabir before we get into it. So Sister Sahar was born and raised in Ontario, Canada. She completed her double honours in sociology and communication. She resides in Lebanon, where she studied a few years of Islamic studies with the pursuit to create an impact in Muslim children's literature. She started her own publications company known as Figs and Olives Publications. She's recently published her first book titled But Why is Hijab So Special? This book aims to educate and inspire young females and males about the hijab. The main goal of the publishing company is to provide reliable and educational resources for parents and children to build a strong Islamic foundation. Her dreams and aspirations in life are to empower the Muslim generation through literature and knowledge. So now I'd like to invite Sister Sahar to join the live event.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me.
Sister, thank you for joining us and making time for our event.
It's my pleasure. It's an important topic, so it's definitely something I'm excited about.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So good luck.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So throughout this couple of weeks, we're going to be discussing Islam and feminism and women's rights. And it's important to know that all topics discussed are not my personal opinion, rather from an Islamic standpoint. And so it's important to understand that if something does not sit right with you, maybe it's because of certain ideologies or beliefs that you have put in place that may not actually sit right with Islam itself. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing my screen and sharing a presentation with everyone, and we'll be working on that basis, inshallah. So the topic of femalehood and femininity in Islam is an extremely important topic that is not discussed enough in our community, unfortunately. And so throughout these few weeks, what we're going to be doing is discussing it from the understanding of a status of females in Islam, marital roles, and the obligation of females. And so if we were to give a brief historical analysis of Islam and of how women were actually treated in Islam, we'd understand that ever since the beginning of time, really, since Catholicism brought this idea that females are the reason for all the sin on earth, women were blamed and were scarred as evil. They were understood as something that came with Satan, really. And it is the reason for all sin on earth. And this point actually destructively impacted females pre-Islamic era, because the understanding was that Adam and Eve would not have reached to earth, to their sin, if Eve was not tempted by the devil. And so this brought all sin and all the burden of sin on women's back. And it stayed like that for a very long time. Even until the time of Islam, we see that Islam actually did not categorize women as a human being, but rather identified them as animals. And so they were merely human, they were merely a form of animals for procreation and for the male gaze. But apart from that, they had no equality or role with males. And so if we were to look at women's oppression pre-Islamic era, we see that female infanticide was so common, the killing of females, of young infants. We also see that once husbands were dead, the children were actually stripped away from the mother and were given to a male protective or to someone else within the family, but they were never within the custody of the female. The woman had no rights of inheritance. Men would commonly leave women without actually advising them that they were divorcing them. They would just leave them for years and months, and the woman, of course, cannot remarry under Islamic principle until she knows that she is divorced. And so men commonly divorce the female by just saying that she's like the back of my mother, and women were regarded to have no ability to participate in politics or academics or trading or anything, really. And the worst one, of course, is that females were commonly married off to men without even asking them for their permission first. The dowry was actually taken by the father and was not given to the daughter at all. And even having a female within your family was actually seen as a shame. Giving birth to a daughter, of course, we know was shameful, was something that was not pleasant. And so in the Islamic era, once Prophet Muhammad came, it's important to understand all this oppression and to actually place yourself in his position. A prophet coming to actually break down all of this understanding that females are less than males and that females should be killed and that there's no respect that should be given to females. And then this man coming and saying that, your guys are doing this all wrong. You're not supposed to kill them. You're actually supposed to give them a dowry. You're actually supposed to ask them for permission to be married. They are actually equal to you in the eyes of Allah. So imagine how confused and complicated it must have been for them to understand these concepts. And that's why it's actually revolutionary when we look at these concepts in the Quran. Because to us, these might just seem like everyday quotes or everyday narrations that, females and males are equal. But at their time, that was not something that was understood. And unfortunately, very microaggressive forms of traditions and of ways of looking at females from their time still exist until today because of their traditions and because of their cultures, because they have not genuinely taken this Quranic verse to mean what it does mean. And so this Quranic verse, it actually discusses three very fundamental points. It says, "O people." So first, it's actually addressing males and females. It's not discussing one form of gender. It's discussing males and females through the collective noun people. And so it says that we have created you from male and female. So here it's categorizing. And then it says that you were created into nations and tribes. So there's equality between every form of nation. There's no certain nation or status quo that's higher than the other status quo. And it then says that in order for you to actually differentiate who is the highest or who is the most noble, it's important that you actually look at it through the eyes of your taqwa, of your God-fearing, and whether or not that is what you have placed. And so when we look at how God has actually categorized or how God actually created the soul and whether or not God has actually made males or females equal, we see that in the Quran, God has said that he has created us from a single soul, from one soul. And so this one soul was actually the soul that he created and that he blew into Prophet Adam. This soul was then created into a male and female. Souls in Islam are actually seen as genderless. There isn't a gender. Your soul does not have the female gender. attached to it. It is merely a soul. And so that's why when God actually comes to see your deeds, he does not place it that, he favors men. And so because this soul is a male gender, I'm going to favor them and provide them with heaven. It's actually because of their taqwa, because of their God-fearing, because of their actions. And so gender is actually secondary in Islam. It's not fundamental. It's not the primitive role. It's only through your gender that you're actually able to perform the obligations in Islam and perform your worldly duties and actually ultimately reach to your perfection. And it's these worldly obligations that God has constructed. These need to be performed through a gender, through a form. And that is why God created males and females, so that he can actually provide us with the platform to move through this world successfully. It's really as if a teacher were to have given you, two types of tests. You get a test and your friend gets a test. Type test A, test B, so that you guys don't cheat. And so these different forms of tests, ultimately, you're gonna either pass or fail math, but it's the same concept, because males have their own version of a test and females have their own version of a test, when really the essence of it is that it's a math test. Similarly, our soul, the essence of it is that we are a human soul. We are given this beautiful honor and privilege by God. And so it really comes down again to your taqwa and to your deeds, not your gender. And this idea that males and females are equal in the eyes of God is fundamental, because when you understand this concept, then you're able to actually understand that other concepts within Islam are actually equal in their own form and their own rights, which we will be discussing shortly. So if we were to just categorize and differentiate between Islam and Western civilization, we'd see that Islam was actually ahead of its time. It was actually able to perform things before other nations, and especially the Western civilization, which we put at this very high hierarchy. So at the time of Islam, when Prophet Muhammad was of course preaching it, he said that females are actually considered as a full personhood. They're considered as a human being. There's no difference between that. This concept, as well as all the others, such as females are not a source of sin. When we discuss the verse of the sin of Prophet Adam and Eve, it's discussed that the terminology in it is discussed that both of them committed something, not that Eve committed something. So in Islam, it's not actually understood in the same way as Catholicism or Christianity. And so we then see that Sayyidah Khadija had her own property. She sold and owned property. She had her own trading. And so again, females actually were able to own and sell. And then we also see that there is no difference in gender status in the eyes of Allah, other than their attained deeds. And this is seen through the understanding that if I were to ask you who is the equal to Prophet Muhammad, who is the equal to Imam Ali, instantly you would reply Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. And so there is an equal to them. And if there is an equal to a male, that means that the female and male have no difference between them. That means they are equal in a sense. And so there is no difference in the eyes of Allah as to who is better. While in Western civilization, if we were to understand it, we see that it wasn't until the 1870s, and then it was actually refixed until 1882, where Women's Property Act was given, when women can actually own land. It took them until 1882. And then in 1918s, we see that, women can actually vote who are above 30. When in Islam, Prophet Muhammad actually gave them the ability to, who do you choose as your imam or caliph, etc. It was given to them right then and there. In 1923, we see the proposed Equal Rights Amendments, the Treaty of Rome, principle of equal pay for women. So all of these in Western civilization took a longer time. And of course, this goes back to their Catholicist beliefs of Eve's sin and how they actually understood the role of a female compared to Islam. So women's right. Islam is known for improving women's rights and inheritance. However, Western civilization has actually tainted it, and has made it seem as though Islam does not care for their females' projections or what actually best suits them. And so if we were to look at this article written by Margaret Bedran, if anyone did want to look into it, the conversion to Islam brought improvements for women, including new inheritance rights, the reduction of polygamy, the outlawing of female infanticide, and the rights for women to participate in bay'ah. However, following the death of Prophet Muhammad, patriarchal interests reasserted themselves, threatening the rights Islam granted women. I definitely agree with this, because when Prophet Muhammad provided us with Islam, it was provided in the means that I had told you. However, after that, a lot of the tribal men went back to their tribal beliefs. They started acting the same manner. And that's why, even until today, we can see a lot of the traditions and forms of treating women has not changed, because they're still living at that time of culture and traditions. And so there's this beautiful analysis by Shahid Mutahari, which says that the domestic system is collapsing. The basic matrimony is weakening. Young men are evading marriages. Young women are hating motherhood. Modern women are becoming vulgar. Love is becoming replaced with cheap sensuality. Cases of divorce are increasing. Number of children without marital statuses are rising, and respect between spouses is becoming rare. And it's this concept that we're going to be talking a lot about, which is the respect between spouses becoming rare. Because even until today, this is the biggest problem that we have within our communities, is that spouses are not respecting each other's role. And because they are not respecting each other's role, they are then forced to perform the other person's role. And this is becoming a clash, blurred lines. It is not being understood whose role is what. It's because they are not respecting each other's roles. And so the question then becomes, does Islam regard women equal to men? When we discuss this question, we have to understand that even though equality for women may sound nice, may sound beautiful, may sound like, that's what I want equality for women. In reality, that's not actually what we should be aiming for. Islam does not necessarily work in the basis of equality per se. It gives us equality. However, it gives us equality through equity. Equity is what Islam focuses on. When we discuss equity, it means that every single person is given their due rights. Every person, whatever that person deserves is whatever that person will get. So for instance, if I were to give you an example, if you had a teenager, a 14-year-old, and then you had a young child that was 6 years old, would you give that 6-year-old the same share of a meal as the 14-year-old? Of course not. It would be unfair to that young child, and it would be unfair to the older child. Likewise, you wouldn't give the 6-year-old's meal to the 14-year-old. You cannot. If you were to perform that, then you are actually not providing them with what they would need, with what they would regard it as essential for them. And so you're not giving them their due right. You're not providing them with the essential means of actually living and moving forward in their life. And so it's important on that basis to understand that you need to give as per what they actually require. And that's how God works. God works on the basis that He will provide you with what you will need in order to reach to your perfection, in order to reach to where you need to be. And if we were to discuss it on the basis of equality, then a lot of things will not make sense. Because then you would be trying to say, well, I need an equal form of what the males get, if what the men get. But it's actually not a discussion. Men and women are biologically and socially different. And so if I were to tell you that, we want exactly what the men get, and we can actually perform what the men want, we can perform as much work as the men can perform, okay? So we're working now 35 hours a week. And we can also perform all the other actions of, being the financial person that's responsible for the family, etc. if I were to put myself in that position and demand for equality technically to the man, can you then tell me that the man can actually perform an equal stance to you? Because when we're talking about equality, that means that both parties can perform their action in an equal form. So say I can perform some of the actions of the male, even though of course I cannot. Can they perform all the actions of me? Can they perform that motherhood role? Can they become pregnant with a child and feel that the troubles of being pregnant, the troubles of menstruation every single month, can they actually put themselves in a position where they're fully being aware of what the female is going through? Of course not. Likewise, the female cannot actually put themselves in a position where they're feeling everything that the male's going through. And so it's not a discussion, really. When you're discussing equality for males, it's this imaginary term that you are trying to aim to, but it has no practical or rational form of performing it. You're just going to be chasing something that you'll never catch, you'll never get. And that's exactly what we're seeing with feminism nowadays, is that they're constantly chasing, well, you know what, now we want emancipation from men. Now we don't want the motherhood. Now we don't want the family structure. They're constantly chasing something for equality for men, but why are they chasing that when they have specific roles given to them and specific forms and specific in nature that is ideal for who they are? And so on the basis of human dignity, the question then becomes, should the genders have the same rights without any discrimination, or should they have equal rights according to their roles? Is it a topic? Is it a discussion that each one should have rights without discrimination? Or is it a discussion that equal rights according to their roles? The female roles, the male roles, which are very tainted nowadays, very strained. And so when we look at how Islam actually categorized it, it put it into perspective. It discussed it as a natural and inherent rights. And so your natural capability, what are you natural capable of? And so if we were to give an example of the natural capability, you'd see that, a child is actually capable of learning and growing wiser. Therefore, of his rights is that the parent provide them with knowledge and with an environment to learn and grow, such as school. While a sheep does not have that capability to learn and grow, such as the human being. And this example was given by Shahid Mutahari. And so the sheep cannot then have that same right that they need to go to school. The rights here are different. Does that mean that if I am not providing the sheep with a school, with an educational platform, that I'm not providing them with what they deserve? Of course not. They do not have the capability, and so they do not deserve it. That is the understanding that we should be. If I were to go based on equality and similarity, then I would say, the child goes to school, the sheep has to go to school, even though the sheep cannot go to school. And when we discuss inherent rights is actually your futra. What is a God-given right to you? And if you were to look at your inherent rights, and if you were to be inspired by them, and of course, the birth of Imam Zain al-Abidin just passed, you can understand a lot of the rights through the 40 amendments that he has, through the 40 eminent rights that he has. A lot of it comes into perspective. And so when we discuss equality, it's important to understand that Islam does not believe that in all cases both genders have the same rights and obligations. It provides males with certain obligations and it provides females with different obligations. However, if we look at the fundamental obligations, we look at fasting, we look at prayer, we look at charity, we look at khums, all of these are equal for males and females. There's no difference in the fundamental forms of worship. However, in certain positions, females have to perform worship a different manner, males have to perform a different manner, such as Salat Jama'ah and in congregational prayers. Females must perform their prayers behind the men. And so just because there's a difference in how the jurisprudence or the rulings or the verdicts takes place does not mean that there's an inferiority to it. If feminism or Western culture has tainted this idea that because they're at the back, and the back is seen as something that's negatively, it's connoted as something that's negative, therefore this person is inferior, subordinated, or oppressed, the females have no rights, have no say because they're sitting at the back. That actually makes no sense. We're actually respecting the female's body and figure and who she is, her nature, her character, by allowing her to pray in the back. It's a form of respect. And so it's a difference of opinion, it's a difference of perspective. And so when we look at Islamic verdicts, these differences are derived through a valid reason. There's a reason as to why females have certain verdicts and males have certain verdicts. It's logical. Islam is extremely logical. And so Shahid Mutahari says, if instead of blindly following the Western ideas, we allow ourselves some independent thinking, the first question which comes to mind is whether equality of rights does really mean the similarity also. So does it mean when we discuss equality, does that mean that my equality has to be the same as the male's equality? If I wear a hijab on my head, if I cover my hair, the male has to cover his hair. Does that mean that it's the same? And so we see this beautiful quote by the revolutionary leader who says that Islam put women on par with men and made them equal with men. Of course, there are certain Islamic precepts which apply only to men and others that apply only to women. But this does not mean that Islam discriminates between men and women. They've understood this incorrectly. A lot of Muslims, unfortunately, have understood this incorrectly. That since our roles are different than the males, and since the males' roles are societally understood as more important, therefore their role is more important, therefore Islam is inferior to women, therefore Islam is patriarchal, etc. Just to bring enlightenment as to how important Islam actually viewed Muslim women roles. We see that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, again, she was a fruit, her essence was a fruit from heaven. And so her equality to Prophet Muhammad and Imam Ali, there was no difference. Actually, it's the opposite. If it wasn't for Imam Ali, then there would not have been an equal to Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Again, then we look at Sayyidah Maryam. If you were to analyze the family lineage of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra and of Sayyidah Maryam, just by analyzing it, you see that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is actually the lineage of Prophet Muhammad. She is Al-Muhammad. Therefore, when you say Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, this Al-Muhammad is actually the lineage of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Again, when you're looking at Al-Ibrahim, this lineage of Al-Ibrahim is actually Sayyidah Maryam, because she is the one, of course, that we know that God provided her with Prophet Isa. He made her at a very high ranking to provide her with Prophet Isa. And so her ranking here, if you were to just understand as to what was she understood and what role did she perform in order to reach to her high ranking, you would see that she was a mother. You would see that she was a caring neighbor. You would see that she was really a sister to everyone in her community. She was a worshiper to God. She used to be of service to the temple, such as providing them with whatever the temple needed, caregiving the temple, really. And so at the same time, she was studying with her uncle, the Prophet, and at the same time, she was actually being active within the community. And she was constantly in worship and constantly in conversation with the angels. And so every single person here in this image had a role as a mother. Her primitive role was a mother and as a wife. And these roles are actually what accentuated them, what made them into who they are. And it is actually without them that the male's roles cannot be performed. And so they are equal to the male's roles. However, they're equal in a different stance and they're equal in a different form. And so when we discuss feminism, well, first it's important to actually define what feminism is. So feminism is a women's movement that aims to eliminate the traditional gender roles. Very simple, correct? And it sounds nice. We want to eliminate traditional gender roles. My question here becomes, who said it's actually a good thing to eliminate the traditional gender roles? Why is that something that we are actually trying to do? Why do we want to eliminate them? Is it beneficial for the community and for society to eliminate them? And if we were to eliminate them, who is actually going to perform them? So these questions should arise when you hear a definition. And then it's understood that, that we have to distinguish feminism from women's movement, because Islam is a women's movement. Islam is its own form of women's movement. God provide us verdicts and legislations under a female, for females, God provide us Islamic verdicts and rulings. We have our own understanding. The parent must take our approval in order to be married. The dowry is ours. We have a right to own land. The child, certain amounts of years, is our custody. There are so many rights for the female. And so therefore, Islam is categorized as a women's movement. Yet, when we discuss women's movement, a lot of our ideas go directly into feminism, that feminism is the only form of women's movement out there. While that is actually incorrect. Feminism is not the only form of women's movement. There are a lot of other forms of women's movement out there. And so I can be someone that believes in women's movement, not agree with feministic beliefs. Because if I were to just look at the base level of what feminism is, just the base level, the understanding that we have to be equal to men, I do not agree with that, because there's a different form of equality that we are God-given. And so this base level on its own is insufficient for us. And therefore, we can't even go into the first, second, third wave feminism, because at this point it's actually useless, because we're not even agreeing with their fundamentals, with their foundation. Therefore, it's better to actually understand it as a women's movement, as Islamic women's movement. Honestly, just saying yourself as a Muslim is sufficient to be understood that you agree and believe in women's rights. So feminism is often defined as a movement seeking full equality to rights with men, but it's important to emphasize that the equality of rights that feminism actually strive for is way above the law. It's not only about the law, it's about gender roles, it's about the understanding of gender, definition of gender, genderism really. And so feminism aims to eradicate the differences in social roles. That's their goal. They don't want something to be a female role and a male role. They want to eradicate it. And that's what distinguishes it from other women's movements. However, when we come to discuss Islam, Islam actually wants to define roles. It wants to place female roles and male roles. Of course, it's not black and white. There are blurred lines, but it wants to place importance as to what the male role can be and what the female role can be. And so in this article that I discussed in the beginning of this topic, Erica, what she did was she went to Iran and she did some ethnography. She lived there within the community and she studied how women were and how men were and feminist rights. However, when she was actually writing this article, she made a lot of mistakes. And the reason why I critique her work is because she did not analyze it through an Islamic perspective. She analyzed it through a Western context. And because she analyzed it through a Western context, she actually misread a lot of the information. And so her view here was that both men and women, they couldn't live up to the moral code, that the woman can live up to the moral code, and that there was really this understanding of submission to male authority. She first did not distinguish between Islamic beliefs and cultural beliefs. Secondly, she did not understand what is the definition of subordination and what is the definition of submission to male's authority. is submission to male's authority me believing that my husband has the final say in the family, that his word is above mine, which means that, just as any political leader, just as any organization, any society really, there is always someone that has that power to make the final decision. Any president in the world, he has the power to make the final decision. This is something that's agreed upon. It's not something confused as to, if one person has the final say. It's actually important in a leadership. It's important in a family structure. It's important in a political structure. And so what is this categorization of subordination and male authority that she's defining to? Something else that she discussed was the veiling and the oppression of women. And inshallah, we'll be discussing this in future weeks. But she said that the forced veiling, which shattered hopes for gains held out by the Islamic Revolution, signaled to some women their subordination on the basis of sex and socioeconomic and political life. This is very unfortunate that she understood it like this, because the way she's interpreting it is that since Imam Khomeini made it mandatory for the females to wear the hijab, therefore he's taking a political stance, therefore the hijab is a form of political obligation. Rather, Islam actually, if you were to go under an Islamic law, it's fundamental for that Islamic law to actually observe that the females are wearing the hijab. And so by an Islamic state, just like any other state, just like the British respect that no one can touch their queen because that's their beliefs. To them, it's seen as a form of respect. And to us, it's seen, well, you know what? Through the hijab, it's our form of respect to the female role. And so it's not a subordination again. It's not this effort for political control. It's not a form of subordination. It's a form of obligatory Islamic practices. And so, again, this was seen in the form of the hijab as a dehumanized practice by Muslim female followers, when in reality we know it's not. The hijab is not oppressive. Similarly to how the nuns wear the hijab, it's not oppressive. Another interesting concept that she integrated into her article is that she said that the ideological construct of the woman of the new Islamic Republic is accompanied by a push to push women out of the workforce and back into the home. And she's critiquing this. She's saying that this is a bad thing that Imam Khomeini did, in which he encouraged females to leave the workforce to focus on their family. That is actually incorrect, because she says here that we used incentives and tactics. So she's using these very negative connotative meanings that, we actually provide them retirement from these government jobs early, and that we actually asked women to not participate as judges. Again, these are Islamic principles. These are Islamic ideologies. These are not subordination of females. This is a way to actually make the female understand that there needs to be someone that's taking care of the family. The male has his role, the female has her role within the society. And so it needs to be that the female actually focuses on her family first. Is everything met with the family? That does not mean that everything has to be perfect, and it does not mean that every single family structure has the same family structure. Some family structures have it differently. And again, we'll be discussing this in next week's topic. However, in Islam's understanding, it is that the female has the role as the mother, as a caretaker, and the male has the role as actually providing the economic, financial sustenance for the family. So the impact of feminism, why feminism is so unapplicable to Islam, is so dangerous for Islam, is because of these four things, really, just to summarize it. It's because number one, it asks for complete equality to men. This is placing unrealistic expectations. You're going to be chasing something that does not exist, again. It fails to recognize Islam as a woman's movement. It stains Islam as something that's subordinated and oppressive. Our practices, our cultures, the way we do things within our Islamic beliefs, they're tainting all of this as secondary, because they're seeing who comes first, who stands in the front, whose voice is the loudest. Is it a male's or a female's voice? Are females allowed to preach in front of males? If they're not allowed to preach, therefore, you know what? It's the female's fault. They're subordinated. The emancipation of men. They're calling for females to not actually see the male within his rightful role. We have a role as females to respect male's role. What is the male's role? We have to respect that role. It's not that they have to be emancipated from their role, to be removed from that role. This is integrating a lot of hatred towards the male understanding. So again, it goes back to the understanding of what Shahid Mutahari said in the beginning of this discussion, that females are becoming vulgar. They're becoming disrespectful. They're starting to hate marriages and to hate motherhood. And so it deems Islam as patriarchal. This is fundamentally incorrect, because if you were to look at the definition of patriarchy, it's actually a group that excludes females from it. Islam is not patriarchal, because Islam never once excluded females from it. It just changed the means in which females participate in society. It did not exclude it. It provided it with its full rights. If anything, it respected females before any other religion or any other culture actually respected females. And so if we were to look at this beautiful analysis by Muhammad Legenhausen, and he has an incredible book on Islam.org, if anyone were to look at it, he says that the primary role accorded to women in Islam are those of a wife and a mother. Yet it is precisely these roles in which feminists are most uncomfortable with. So feminists are concerned with liberating women from expectations that they should marry and have children. And so their progress, feminist progress, is that, employment, income, non-traditional sexual relations, and political power, that's where they see power. That's where they see the emphasis, isn't? While in Islam, it actually does not say that that's where the power is. It says that there's actually more focus and emphasis on marriage and family. Your role within the family and within the marriage, that's actually where you're supposed to be. That's where Islam wanted you to be. While feminism wants to take you out of it, does not believe in those roles as fundamentally important and equal to the male's roles. And so ultimately, the most important role for women in Islam is being a servant of God. And so this is no different than the role assigned to men. So it's as a servant of God that you're able to take on the role as a mother, as a wife, as a sister. These roles, you're able to take them on when you become a servant of God that understands the importance of these roles. And so if I were to just leave you off with a quote, it would be that Professor William Montgomery Watt, he's done a lot of important Western work, but he says that when seen in historical context, Prophet Muhammad can be seen as a figure who testified on behalf of women's rights. And so this is very fundamental to know that Prophet Muhammad actually stood as one of the first men in societies to say that females are no less and no different than men. And so if anyone did want to reach me, I'll leave this on for a bit more. Feel free to contact me, inshallah, with any concerns.
Thank you, Sister Sahar, for this amazing talk. Honestly, I was blown away, and I'm sure the viewers and the audience thought it was thought-provoking.
Thank you.
I really liked your emphasis on culture versus Islam and shedding a light on the importance of gender equity rather than gender equality, and how actually equity can sometimes lead to equality.
Definitely.
Yeah, I thought, even in my professional work, so I work in healthcare, and when we look at how to make the workplace more suitable for women to work, we actually focus a lot more on gender equity rather than equality, and actually see what do women actually need in the workplace.
Yeah,
so
because
it's very important.
Yeah, because you're gonna have certain colors that are gonna attract the females more than males. But again, then feminism would say, then you're genderizing, then you're making a gender neutral form, and that's incorrect. And then you go into those discussions again.
Definitely. I think it's a topic that we can talk for hours and hours, maybe even days. So I'd just like to say to anyone who's watching the live and maybe they thought they agreed with anything or even disagreed, I'd like to say reflect and actually try to challenge yourself and say, why do I believe this?
Definitely.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you Sister Sahar for joining us. And just like to remind you that this is a weekly event, so please join us next Monday, and it'll be every Monday throughout Shaaban. And if you'd like to stay updated with any events, follow the Lebanese Youth Foundation on Facebook and Instagram. And Sister Sahar put her in media pages just before, so feel free to share that and follow this. Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Stay safe and take care.
Inshallah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.